Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I have the self-aware reader tag. I was tagged by Emily of Novel Novels and this tag was created by Courtney Ferreter, or Ferrier. I don't know how to pronounce it. My apologies if it was incorrect. Let's begin. What most draws you into a novel or story and makes you want to keep reading? Plot, character, writing style, atmosphere, or something else? I would probably go with writing style. I don't know that I'm looking for a specific writing style, but I do think that a story can be a bit make or break when it comes to the way that a tale is told. If there is some very good storytelling going on in the book, then it's more than likely that I will stick with the narrative and I will get a better impression of a book. To mention The Miseducation of Evie Epworth by Matson Taylor here. With that book, it is a very predictable plot that we have seen done many times before, but it's become one of my favourite books because of the telling of that tale, the mix of humour in there and the harkening back to classic British comedy and the strong northern women. It's always in the telling because a book can have the most fantastic pristine plot. It can have been edited to within an inch of its life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have an enjoyable reading experience. 2. What is a convention or trope that will immediately turn you off in your reading experience with a novel or story? Well, one trope that I have always hated, I mentioned it in my review of The Binding last year, is the memory loss trope. I hate when it's used. It's never something that I like. And I'm talking specifically maybe in a series or novel where memory loss is used to take a character back in terms of a series to what they were at the start of the series and just restart the whole series again. Or in crime fiction, it's used to heighten tension because there was really no way the author could think to stop the protagonist from knowing who'd committed a crime or who'd done something. 3. What most appeals to you when reading non-fiction and makes you want to keep reading? I don't really understand this question, but what I will say is that something that has stuck with me since uni is that the best non-fiction and memoir will read like prose and it will read like fiction. When I'm reading non-fiction, you can present the facts to me in an accessible way that doesn't feel like having to read through a load of facts and figures. I don't want it to sound like a report. I want it to sound like it has to have a natural flow. 4. What is a convention or trope in non-fiction that will turn you off in your reading experience? Once again, I don't really understand this at all. I don't know whether we're looking at a specific type of non-fiction here. Let's see what the creator says. From the creator's video, she mentions a lack of objectivity and also a lack of offering a solution when you come up with a problem. I'm not sure whether I'd necessarily use convention or trope here, but yeah, those are definitely bad things. In terms of non-fiction, for me, it's like it is just to do with the reading experience. If it's written in a certain way, then I suppose here like objectivity does have something to do with that. So in terms of the Badgerlands book a few years ago that I read, the writer in this book where he's talking about badgers and the history of them begins to talk about the badger-cull in Britain, which the activists who were campaigning against the badger-cull were getting into fights with the farmers. Now, some of these activists, the way the author presented the activists and the way they were being treated was in this very sympathetic manner. In terms of the farmers, he literally mentions a case of 3-year-old children being targeted at the school gates, getting death threats from certain activists, and acts as though this is what they should expect. And I'm like, no 3-year-old should get death threats. And I don't mind whether the author feels a certain type of way about the badger-cull or whatever, that's fine. But when you're presenting one side of the story with sympathy and one side where people are actually receiving death threats and you're kind of okaying that, that was something that really is perhaps where I agree with the creator of this tag, really, that you do need a sense of objectivity when you're talking about non-fiction. It's okay to have an opinion, but you perhaps need to not allow this opinion to, just don't sanction death threats probably in your non-fiction and I'll be okay. And 5, would you say you read more for pleasure and enjoyment or more to learn and exercise your brain? Definitely more for pleasure and enjoyment, but I don't mind exercising my brain. I have talked about being a mood reader before, and sometimes I really want something a bit, I wouldn't say hefty or intellectual, but something that is going to be more stimulating. Sometimes, like this last month, I felt more like reading the cozier books, something where it's going to have a very easy narrative voice. It's not going to perhaps be too literary, so I'll stick with popular fiction or non-fiction for this. Whereas perhaps when I'm feeling a bit more pretentious, I'll go for something more literary and where I'm going to have to think more about what the book's about. 6, which type of books are you likely to rate more highly and enjoy more overall? Brain candy, pleasure and enjoyment books, or brain protein, learning, exercise books? Once again, it all comes down to the writing style. That's it. There are times when you're going to have a book that you've read for pleasure or enjoyment and it's not going to hit the mark as a book that you've read to learn something, and vice versa. 7, do you have a sense early on whether or not the book you're reading will be a 5-star read or a book you really like? Has a book ever surprised you in this regard? Yes, there have been plenty of times when I've read a book that I've thought is going to be a fantastic book and it has hit the 150-page mark, immediately taken a nosedive and has ended up being a terrible book. Indeed, there was a book I read once where it was only 330 pages. At page 300, something happened and it ruined the entire book for me. 8, considering books that you've rated 5 stars in the past, or if you don't rate them, then books you really loved, do you think you would feel the same way about them now? Why or why not? I could not say. All I can say is that I read The Tiger's Wife in 2011-2012, and that was a book that I really enjoyed. When I used to give star ratings, I gave it 5 stars, and when I most recently tried to read it, I ended up giving the book away and could not finish it, because the thing is, you grow as a reader and you recognise things that worked for you in the past don't necessarily work for you now. It's the same thing with young adult fiction. I talk about all the time how I outgrew young adult literature, and I have no problem with the genre. I have no problem with talking about the books that I would call favourites, but I probably wouldn't revisit them now because I wouldn't want to ruin the experience I had with them years ago, knowing that I stopped reading books of that genre because I no longer cared for the tropes or the way that they were written. Yes, sometimes there is fantastic young adult fiction, and it's not a genre, it's a way it's written to appeal to a certain audience, and there are books there that are probably fantastic, but I wouldn't revisit the books that I had read then, because I know that as I was moving away from those sorts of books, that my opinions of writing style changed, and I wouldn't want to ruin that for myself. Then we have 9, which is to tag people. I just don't want to. If you fancy doing this tag, then feel free, come back, tell me you've done it, and I'll give it a watch. But yeah, I just can't think of anyone to tag at the moment, so yeah. I'm going to leave things there. I hope that you got something out of this video besides sheer boredom. I recognise that most of my answers were completely the same, so there's that. There's that ending on a bit of self-awareness for you. Go on, be off with you, because until next time, that is all.